Don't play with it, don't be dishonest. Still not understanding.
Hi guys, welcome to this video. My name is Ms. Gobane and I teach life sciences and natural sciences. Today I want us to look at genetic pedigrees, also known as genetic lineages, which show inheritance of characteristics in a family over generations. So the first thing that you need to note is how many generations are in the family. In this case, we have 3 generations. The next thing that we note are the circles and the squares with their meanings. The circles represent the females while the squares represent the males. The shaded circles would be the affected female and the shaded squares will be the affected male. In this example, we'll take that the shaded characteristic is controlled by a recessive allele. Next, you will count the number of females and the number of males. In this case, we have 8 females as well as 6 males. You'll then have to check how many females are affected as well as how many males are affected. We have 1 affected female as well as 3 affected males. I'm then going to number each individual so that it is easier to identify their phenotypes and genotypes. So now let us decide on a trait. We can maybe decide on height and just say tall is dominant over short. This means that the shaded circles and squares represent short, and then the ones that are not shaded, they represent tall. Starting with the shaded individuals, they are homozygous recessive since short is controlled by a recessive allele. Now moving to the individuals that are not shaded, to figure out their genotype, we'll start with number 1 and number 2. They should be heterozygous since they have children, number 6 and 7, who have the recessive allele. Number 5 could be homozygous or heterozygous, unsure because we don't know their children. Then number 8 and number 9 should also be heterozygous since they have a child, number 14, who has the recessive allele. Number 12 and number 13, on the other hand, could be homozygous or heterozygous. Going back to number 3 and number 4, they should be heterozygous since they have child number 11 who is homozygous. And then number 10 could be homozygous or heterozygous. Just a key factor here, parents who have children that have the trait that is controlled by a recessive allele should be heterozygous since they pass on the recessive allele. Now let's do an example. It says here, moyamoya is a disorder caused by a dominant allele. This disorder damages the arteries supplying blood to the brain. We have individuals A to J. The first thing we can do is just write down the dominant and the recessive allele. Capital letter R, which is the dominant allele, is an affected male or female, and then the small letter r will be the recessive allele and an unaffected person. Then you identify the generations. There are 3 generations in this family. That's A and B, C, D, E, and F, and then G, H, I, and J. We then look at the number of males and the number of females. Going to the first question, how many generations are represented? We've already identified that as 3. The next question, you identify the letters of unaffected males. We look at the squares that are not shaded, and that is 1, H. So with the next question, the genotype for individual A, firstly looking at B, they are homozygous recessive, and D is also homozygous recessive. It means that A passed on a recessive allele to D, which makes individual A heterozygous. And the last question, letters of individuals that are not biologically related to A and B would be C and F, since they are partners of their children. And that is it on this question. We can move on to the next one. It says albinism is caused by an autosomal recessive allele, which means it is carried on the autosome. Here we have individuals that are named and some aren't. But first things first, we start with the number of generations, which is 3. From there we know that the ones that are not shaded are normal and the ones that are shaded are affected. Because albinism is controlled by a recessive allele, we know that all that are shaded, they are homozygous recessive. Now Lizzie, on the other hand, is heterozygous because they have a child there who has albinism, so she should be a carrier of the recessive allele. Bob, on the other hand, received the recessive allele from John, and Anne received the recessive allele from Mary. We're unsure whether the parent of Anne is homozygous or heterozygous. Going to the first question, Mary's phenotype. We can see that Mary is an affected female. We've already identified Liz's genotype as well as John's genotype. Now the last question, you explain why Bob and Anne are both heterozygous for albinism. So Bob is heterozygous because they have an affected child, definitely. So their son is affected with 2 recessive alleles, and they inherited each recessive allele from each parent. Now also note that our answer has 2 parts. Since it's an explained question, it has the what and the why. Let's move on to the next question. It says study the diagram of a family where some individuals have hemophilia. We're told hemophilia is sex-linked. Hemophilia is carried on the X chromosome, so it means you need to identify the sex chromosomes, and males with hemophilia will have the recessive allele on their X chromosome, while those who are normal will have the dominant allele. Females can be homozygous or heterozygous. For them to have hemophilia, they need to be homozygous recessive. But on the diagram, there are no females with hemophilia. Only normal males, hemophilic males, and normal females. Now we look at the number of generations. There are 1, 2, 3, 4. And that is the first question. Going to the second question, we want the number of males with hemophilia. You see there are 3. Now the last question, we identify the possible genotypes for Peter, Enid, and Clarence. Peter is a hemophilic male with the recessive allele on his X chromosome. Enid should be heterozygous since Goliath gets the recessive allele from her. And lastly, Clarence is a normal male, so they have the dominant allele on their X chromosome. The last question is about muscular dystrophy, which is controlled by a recessive allele, while normal would be the dominant allele. In this family, there are 3 generations. We have only males, 5, and 2 females. And 4, 7, and 8, they are the males with muscular dystrophy, which means that they will have the recessive allele on their X chromosome. Number 5 and 6, on the other hand, are normal. There is a normal female and a normal male. The male has the dominant allele, and the female should be heterozygous since their children have muscular dystrophy, which is the same as number 1 and number 2. Number 1 will have the dominant allele, and number 2 will be heterozygous since number 4 has muscular dystrophy. And lastly, number 3 is a normal male, so they'll have the dominant allele. Let's go into the questions. We look at the offsprings of individual 1 and 2. That is 3, 4, and 5, and that means there are 3. The phenotype of individual number 1, there is a normal male or male without muscular dystrophy rather, since it's given in the key. And then genotype for individual 2 would be given there, heterozygous. In the next question, you explain why more males than females are likely to have muscular dystrophy. Remember the what and the why. So our what will be that males have 1 X chromosome and need 1 recessive allele. The why will be that it cannot be masked to have MD, while females have 2 X chromosomes and will need 2 recessive alleles. This will then allow them to mask the recessive allele. This is a 4-mark question, hence we are comparing males to females. Now the last question, parents 5 and 6, they want to have another child. We use a genetic cross to show the percentage chance of having a child with muscular dystrophy. We had already identified the genotypes of number 5 and number 6. So I will rewrite that up here. The first thing that you need to note is that number 5 and number 6 are in the 2nd generation. So in our template, we are going to write P2, phenotype, genotype, the gametes that are formed through meiosis, and then fertilization, and the F2 genotype and phenotype. The phenotype for both are male and female without MD, and then their genotype. You place that in your Punnett square and you do the cross. And then you group them according to their genotypes. They're all different. Phenotypically, the 2 females are without MD and 1 male without MD. There's 1 male with MD. That is a 25% chance.